Well, frankly, I didn't examine it very closely because I had not been following LSU. Well, I was coaching at West Point at the time, and we had just lost 3 coaches from our staff. And each one of them got a head coaching job. I was the only varsity coach left. And I had known that LSU had made a change down here, and they had released their football coach and athletic director. And I knew Charlie McClendon was on the staff here. Charlie Mack and I had been at Kentucky together. I was the line coach for Bear Bryant, and Mack was a graduate assistant. And we started recruiting together. And Mack and I became real close friends, and we said whoever gets a job first will hire the other one. Well, to make a long story short, it turned out that I was still at West Point, but I called up and asked Mack who he would like to go with, because all 3 of these coaches were head coaches and they didn't have a staff. And he said, well, why don't you try to get the LSU job? I said, Mack, I really don't know where LSU is. As a matter of fact, I don't know anything about the school. He said, boy, if you knew some of these trustees down here, he named them all off. Mack was very good at that sort of thing. And I said, I don't know any of those people, Mack. He said, boy, if you knew someone who knew Biff Jones. Going way back, Biff Jones was a football coach at LSU back in the Huey Long days. And his team was behind at the half. Huey Long strode over to the dressing room and said, I'm going to talk to the team. And Biff said, nobody talks to this team but me. Well, Huey Long stormed off, and of course all the dignitaries sat right on the sideline where you can't see a thing. But in any event, the president was sitting there, and Biff gave Herman Lang a little on the back of a match cover, said, just give this to the president. Said, dear President, I resign at the end of this game. And he gave it to him. So when Huey got there, he said, I want that coach fired. And the president said, I can't fire him, he already quit. Well, Biff went on to Nebraska and was very successful. He retired in Washington, D.C. He was in charge of the liaison man with the congressman about appointments. Colonel Blake put me in charge of the recruiting, and so I was talking to Biff Jones 2 or 3 times a week, and I knew him real well, a real fine man. And so I asked Biff, and I said, well, Biff, what about this LSU job? Someone has talked to me about it. I said, is it a good job? He said, well, Paul, it's a very good job if you could keep the politics out of it. But unfortunately, you can't keep the politics out of LSU football. I will make a very long story short. But when I was Sid Gilman was my head football coach that I played for at Miami, Ohio, and who I coached with at West Point and also at the University of Cincinnati. And while I was at Cincinnati, there was a comic strip that I got a big kick out of. I always liked comic strips, you know. And the one I liked most was Terry and the Pirates. And it was drawn by George Wonder, who was a wonderful artist. And in his comic strip, he had these people that he had the Dragon Lady, Terry, and of course Chopstick Joe, who was a great big heavy-set Chinese man. In one of the comic strips he said, from now on, I want you to know that the Chinese bandits are the meanest people in the world. I cut that out and put it on the bulletin board because I was in charge of Sid Gilman's defensive team. And I said, from now on, we're the Chinese bandits. Well, we had a good year. We went to the Sun Bowl and beat Texas Tech, but the next year I went down to Kentucky. Now I was Bear Bryant's offensive line coach. And from there, I went back to West Point as Colonel Blake's offensive line coach. And at that time, that's where I teamed up with Vince Lombardi, because we only had 2 coaches on offense. I was the line coach and he was the backfield coach. But in any event, then I became the head coach at LSU. Well, we were in single platoon football then. And, you know, we played well and we hung in all the games, but we just didn't have the talent, didn't have enough people to compete with the people we were competing with. When I first came here, Tulane was very strong. That was our biggest rival. But eventually it got around to the point where our biggest rival was Ole Miss. In the 57 game, we were ahead of Ole Miss at the half, 7-6. But we had played one team, and Ole Miss had played a lot of people. And our team was so tired at the half. In the second half, I mean, Ole Miss drilled us. I mean, they beat us pretty bad. So in spring, we decided we're going to have to do something different. And I thought, well, the only thing I can think of is we're going to have to design 2 teams. And so we decided we put our best 11 people on our starting team. And we always wore white jerseys, so they were the white team. And then we decided we're going to pick out the second best 11, and they would be our gold team because of gold breeches. And so we couldn't find anyone that could play offense, or they couldn't play defense because it's a very different game. And so we said, well, why don't we just have a offensive team and call them the gold team, which we did. And the press immediately shortened it down to the go team. And then what was left over, we picked them out to be our defensive team. And naturally, I put up that they were going to be the Chinese bandits. Well, they didn't know what is this Chinese bandit stuff, you know. And so we had designed it so that with timeouts, the ball out of bounds and so forth, we could actually start our white team in every quarter of every game. And in the second half of that quarter, we would platoon the offensive team, go team, and the bandits. And as it turned out, it worked out much more perfectly than we had ever planned it would be. But in the end of the year, when we were on a road trip, we had a traveling squad of 33 players because that's all that we're going to play. But every one of those 33 players was going to play in every quarter of every game. And so we played Rice and we beat them in the game, and then we go over and welcome Bear Bryant back to the Southeastern Conference, the new head coach at Texas A&M. And I had been his line coach, so I knew Coach Bryant real well. And they had just been recruiting heavily in Louisiana. And so I called up Coach Bryant. I said, Coach, I know you're recruiting heavily in Louisiana, and I just wanted to tell you that every time you get a player out of Louisiana, that's going to take the food off of my children's plate because I can't afford to have Louisiana people go somewhere else. He said, oh, Pablo. He called me Pablo. He said, we can't have 2 Pauls on the same staff. And he said, oh, Pablo. I said, Coach, I recruited for you, remember? And I know how you recruit, and I know what takes place. And I know John David Crow left Louisiana driving a new torpedo Oldsmobile. Of course, his mother's going to pay for it, and she's going to work it out how she can pay for it when she's on welfare. But nonetheless, I said, I know exactly how you coach. And I'm just telling you that I can't, our coaches are not going to cheat. And I've told them, if you cheat, you're fired. Very simple. If you cheat, they're fired. And we're not going to cheat, and I'm not going to let anyone else cheat. And I just wanted to tell you in advance that anyone that breaks the rules, I'm going to turn them in. And that includes Bear Bryant. He said, well, okay, Pab. They never got another player from us. But that's how it started. And we went to play Alabama in Mobile. That was the night that the end zone bleachers collapsed, which is very interesting. And in this game, Billy Cannon, who was a fantastic athlete, but he was running, and I think he ran over 2 officials and the linebacker and so forth. He gets out about midfield, and he's ripping and snorting, and the ball popped out, and an Alabama boy caught it mid-street and took off for the goal line. We finally knocked him out of bounds on the 3-yard line. And I knew that, the white team had played their portion of the first quarter, and I knew they were going to score anyhow, so I said, okay, Bandits, get in there. So the Bandits went in. On 4th down, Alabama had to kick a field goal. The only points they got that night, by the way, and we scored 13. And it was really, that was the making of the Chinese Bandits. So we get back to Baton Rouge, and then we go down to play a very, very good team in Miami of Florida. And they were really a very strong team. And for some reason, we exploded, and we beat them 41-0. And coming back on the airplane, I said, you know what? I think we've got a pretty darn good football team. A disc jockey in Memphis called me and said, Coach, I've been hearing about these Chinese bandits. Now, I've written this Chinese bandit chant. Would you like to have it? I said, oh, yeah. So he sent it to me, and I talked with the band man, and I said, can you make this into an orchestration? Oh, yeah, I can do that. And I said, so I talked to I'm not sure if he was the same. I don't think he was. But anyhow, I talked to the PA announcer, and I said, now listen, when the bandits go into the game, I want you to say, here come the Chinese bandits. Jack Saban, who ran the goalpost, had said that the first 1,000 students that show up, I'm going to give them a coolie hat, you know. And he was inundated. He had to get some more coolie hats. But when he announced that here come the Chinese bandits, the student body, they all put their hats on. Now we've got, and they're playing the chant, you know, and so it was electrifying. But what made it more electrifying is it was Florida, and they ran an off-tackle play. The ball popped up in the air. Gus Kinchin, the bandit end, caught it in midair. And since they didn't have any offensive plays, he didn't know what to do. He downed it. So the bandits are coming back out, and the Chinese bandit chant hasn't even finished yet. Well, anyhow, it was from that time on the bandits started eating by themselves, you know, and they wanted different colored socks, and it was really funny. And then Life magazine came down here and took a picture of the Chinese bandits, and they had on these Chinese masks, these terrible looking masks. And that picture still floats. I have one, but it still floats around. I still have one of the coolie hats, by the way. But in any event, from that time on, the bandits just kept getting stronger and stronger. And they were getting more publicity than anyone. I think the white team got a little bit huffy about this idea. The bandits getting all this press. And before the final game of the year, we're now in 58, we had a little drill getting ready for the bowl game. And we pitted the three teams against each other. This is the first time they ever had ever practiced hard against each other. And it was a scrimmage on a third down drill, we called it. And in this drill, the bandits beat the other two teams so badly. I mean, it was embarrassing for the white team. They are the starting team. Billy Cannon, Johnny Robinson, and Warren Rabb, and all those Bo Strange, and all these the best athletes we had. And if you won, you got to go in. If you came in second, you had to circle the field around the goalpost 3 times. And if you lost, you had to go up 68 rows to the top. Well, the go team lost because they're not a defensive team. So the white team is running around the goalpost. The bandits don't leave the field. They stay down there leaning against the goalpost, and every time Rabb and Cannon and Robinson come by, they say, now cheer up, guys. You're going to be all right. Don't worry about it. You're going to get better. It'll be fine. And I mean, that white team was so mad. And I think it was Johnny Robinson and Rabb came up to me and says, Coach, we're going to have this drill again tomorrow night, aren't we? I said, well, we'll see. Yeah, I'm not very smart, but I wasn't that dumb. We'd eliminated the whole team because we had to play in a bowl in another couple of weeks. So it was an amazing thing that at the end of the year, the defensive statistics, and because of the 3-team system, we had to keep them very carefully. But the statistics proved that the bandits had played better defense than the white team. And as I said, we lettered 33 players. We had 33 players traveling. I see the squads today. I mean, I see them coming out of the airplane. I thought, good gravy. Are they ever going to stop? Of course, the same thing for coaching staffs, too. Things have grown, you know. Well, this is Ole Miss versus LSU, and by now this had grown into a real ding-dong battle. And, you know, before the week of the game, the practice game, it was very interesting. But the week of the practice game, an airplane flew over and dropped these leaflets, which said, "Go to hell, LSU." Well, that was a takeoff because LSU students were saying, "Go to hell, Ole Miss," for a long time. But in any event, I was at home in our bedroom, sound asleep, 2 o'clock in the morning, and the telephone operator from LSU called and said, "Could I speak with Coach Dietzel?" And Ann said, "Well, you know, he's asleep." He said, "Well, this is important. Could I talk to him?" So I got on the phone. She said, "Coach, the students are over here, and I mean, they're just tearing the police apart. And I mean, we can't get them quiet. The police are out here. They can't get them quieted down. You need to come over here," and the word she said was "quieten them down. You need to come over and quieten them down." And I said, "Okay." So I came over, got my bullhorn, I walked out, and they were raising, "Go to Miss and all that sort of thing. And so I went over and I said, now listen, you know, I really appreciate your enthusiasm, but do you know that our team over here in Broussard Hall, just about a block and a half from here, they're trying to sleep. They've got to play tomorrow night. You've got to cheer tomorrow night. And I want them to be able to pray, and I don't want to have you keep them up all night long, and I don't want you to waste all your lungs out here, because if you don't cheer like mad in this game, we'll have a tough time with Ole Miss. It's going to be hard enough as it is. Now, what I want you to do is go on and go home and go to bed and rest and be ready for the game tomorrow night. Wasn't a sound. They all just turned around and walked off. Anyhow, but the game itself, I thought that was one of the greatest. It's really the greatest article I've ever seen written about a game before it happened. Walter Stewart of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, in his column, he wrote about the LSU Ole Miss game. He said that this is the biggest game that's ever been played this late in the year between two teams that are ranked number 1 and number 3. We were 1 and Ole Miss was 3. And the team that was number 2 got knocked off in the afternoon. So it was 1 and 3. Whoever wins the game is going to be the number 1 team. And so he said, this is a titanic game. And he said, both teams are well coached. Ole Miss is a fine football squad. They're big, they're strong, they're well coached. LSU, on the other hand, is a little smaller, perhaps maybe quicker, and certainly just as fast. And so basically, there's so many good players on both sides of the ball that they'll nullify each other. It could end up being a scoreless tie. However, a great player someplace in this game will win the game. LSU has that great player. And somewhere in the game, Billy Cannon will make the difference. He had to have ESPN to make a coin a phrase. But that's exactly what happened, and we were so fired up that we fumbled the ball 3 times in the first quarter. And Bobby Kayat, who is now I think he's still the chancellor of Ole Miss, either chancellor or president, one of those two. And he went in and kicked a field goal, and they're leading 3-0, and they decided to sit on that. And in order to mess up our substitution rule, they started kicking the ball back to us on an early down, trying to mess up our substitution with our 3 teams. And Jake Gibbs is back, and he punted the ball. He's a tremendous athlete. He's kicking the ball out of sight. And he kicked out 1 too many times. The ball bounced. And we had a rule that you don't handle any punt inside your own 15-yard line, because we were a defensive football team. We only allowed 29 points to be scored against us in the entire year. And so I saw the ball, and it hit. And I saw it take a high bounce, and I saw Billy Cannon eyeing it. And I thought, no, Billy, no. Because all you had to do is catch the ball, have someone hit it, boom, and the game would be over. But it didn't work that way. And as soon as he took off, I think he might have gotten a couple of blocks. But basically, on his own, he ran over everybody, and Jake Gibbs, the punter, was the last one that had a shot on him, and he just ran right past him, and we scored, and now the score is 6-3, and we kicked the extra point into 7-3. And the stadium goes crazy. Now Ole Miss goes into action, and they marched down that field, and they ran for it on 4th down several times. They end up with a first down on the 3-yard line. And we had the darndest goal line stand you've ever seen. And a couple of times they jumped an All-American fullback, Charlie Flowers. They jumped him over the line. Cannon is the middle linebacker. He hit him and knocked him back. Then they try to go off tackle, and Cannon and Reb tackle him along with Red Hendricks, and they knock him back. Now they take Jake Gibbs out. They had 3 quarterbacks. Bobby Franklin was their great passer. Jake Gibbs was their all-around athlete. Doug Elmore was their running quarterback. They put Doug in, and everybody, the coaching staff sure knew exactly what was going to happen because he's going to run student body left. And they did, and I mean, he rolls out behind the entire team, and they're going for the sideline, and Rab slowed him down, and Cannon and somebody else, and I only give credit to the wrong person, but someone else, some other lineman, tackled him on about the 3-yard line. We take over the ball, and for all practical purposes, the game is over. But we run a quarterback sneak, and the game ends. People were in a state of shock. Nobody left the stadium. They're all standing there, stunned. We had several heart attacks in the stadium that night, unfortunately. But that was the dead-burnedest football game I've ever seen, and that cannon run was magnificent and beyond anything I've ever seen before. No other athlete in the world could have made that run at that late in the game, as tired as everyone was, but he had that great stamina. And of course, I think that a lot of the things that happened after that, but that had to be one of the greatest runs that I've ever seen, and I think that everyone else felt that. By the way, it's amazing to I wanted to tell you that LSU keeps enlarging the stadium, and it's getting up there around 90,000, I think, but it gets bigger all the time. But it will never be as big as it was in 1958 1959 when he made that run, because I have met 1.5 million people who were in the stadium that night and saw Billy Cannon's run in person. And of course, if we keep running that game, play over and over on television, everyone feels, well, I was there. I can understand, but that was quite a night. Well, Billy Cannon and Jimmy Taylor, two of the finest athletes, probably two of the finest that this town has ever turned out. But they both got involved with Alvin Roy. Alvin Roy was a weight training coach for the Olympic team, and he opened a weight training program downtown. And he had Billy Cannon and Jimmy Taylor in that program. And I had always been totally against lifting weights, because when I was in high school, anyone that lifted weights, they'd get so muscle bound. We had two brothers that their father had a meat packing, and they lifted the weights, and I mean, they couldn't comb their hair. I mean, they couldn't raise their arms high enough, And so I didn't like weightlifting, but Alvin did it a little differently. He worked on the heavy weights, not these quick reps, but on the heavy weights. And both of these guys were very, very fluid. If you're going to catch a pass, most people over their shoulder would catch it this way. But Jimmy Taylor and Billy Cannon, they turn around and pluck the ball out of the air. Now, you can't do that if you're muscle bound. But they were both they were great athletes. Both of them punted. Jimmy Taylor did anything you wanted him to do. Last year we played Tulane here. I think it was last year. Jimmy Taylor intercepted a pass, kicked a field goal, scored a touchdown, and kicked the extra point. And the paper said, Jimmy Taylor 10, Ole Miss nothing, because he had scored every point. But Jimmy was a fantastic runner with the ball under his arm. Billy Cannon was more of a straight runner, and his asset was his tremendous speed and also his strength. In the Southeastern Conference track meet, Billy ran the 100-yard dash as he consistently did in 9.4. He walked over without even warming up, and he threw a 55-pound shot put and won the shot put for the Southeastern Conference. And so Sport Magazine came out and said that, Billy Cannon is either the fastest weight man or the strongest sprinter in America. And he was both. And he had such great speed. For instance, I'm coaching the blue-gray game, which in off years I coached several times. But I had a young man on that squad from Mississippi State. And we ran a little counter play in which the quarterback would fake and then give it to Cannon, and he would come back this way. And they had looked at the film so much, and this guy who played safety for him said, I'll tell you what, I saw that play so much, I got sick of looking at it. And I made up my mind, if they run that on me, I'm not going to tackle Cannon, I'm going to knock his head off. Well, it didn't take very long because we ran the play, and he saw the guard pull out the trap. He saw the end pulling through the hole, and here comes Cannon. Excuse me. And so he said, I went up there I was going to knock him flat. He said, when I woke up in the hospital, Cannon is left-handed, and by just at the last minute, he saw this guy coming up to tackle him. He forearmed him, he knocked him cold and broke his collarbone, and they carried him off the field. Billy was so strong. Well, I wish I could say that's the greatest decision I ever made, but it might not be, but it was close. But see, my first coaching job was at West Point, and I was a plebe coach up there. And Red Blake at the time was the coach of the Army team. And Red, Army was right up there in the top 5 in the country. It had been for several years. They had the days of Blanchard and Davis, and I mean they were really a football power in the country. And the idea, I'm just graduate. I've been before this happened. Of course, I had been in the service. Ann and I got married after I got my wings in the Army Air Corps. And by the way, we've been married for 65 years now. And she's the best thing that ever happened to me. She's still my best friend and my sweetheart. But in any event, I went overseas as a B-29 pilot in the Pacific. And when I got out of when the war ended and I got out, I was all set to go to medical school in Columbia. And had done went back to Miami, Ohio, where Sid Gilman was the coach, and he was like my dad, really. And he had been writing me all during the war. And I had gone to Duke before the war on a football scholarship, but they never wrote to me. And Sid Gilman at Miami did, plus the fact that Ann was a cheerleader at Miami. Between the two of them, that was where I was going to go and get my pre-med. And so I was taking pre-med at Miami when I got a letter from Sid, who was then the line coach at West Point, and he said, "Mum's the word." By the way, it wasn't a nice letterhead or anything. It was on a yellow tablet. You know how those are. And it said, "Mum's the word. Would you like to be the plebe coach at West Point?" Well, now that was a tough decision, because it was going to make up the decision for my life, because I really wanted to be a surgeon. That's what I had planned to be. And I mean, I might have never made it out of medical school. I don't know, because that's tough. But in any event, I finally decided, I said, Ann, I can't turn that coaching job down. I mean, right out of college and going up to being coaching at a major school in the United States. And so we went to West Point, and we were there for 1 year. Then we left with Sid Gilman and went back to the University of Cincinnati, 2 years. Back to Kentucky, 2 years, Bear Bryant. Back to West Point with Colonel Blake. And I was the line coach, and Vince Lombardi was the backfield coach. And then I came to LSU. And so basically, getting the head coaching job at LSU at the age of 30 that was really fantastic. I was really very lucky. And I was lucky to come to LSU. And frankly, LSU had to take a heck of a chance with me, because I'd never been a head coach. And I'm that young whippersnapper from Army. And after the 3rd year, and as I said, in 1957, I think a good number of them wanted to send me back to West Point, where I came from. But in any event, I think the whole purpose of it was I had gotten so ingrained with the military academy when I was there. I was an officer in the Army Air Corps, so military was not anything new to me. And our daughter and our son were both born at West Point. And they were both taught in Sunday school by cadets. And cadets they're really kind of special people. The average IQ of those fellows is remarkable, because the college boards are sitting in the vicinity of about 140 for the entire Corps. It is true that many of the football players were on the bottom of the class, you understand. They weren't all Hy-Vee, or they call it the real smart ones. But I had never considered being the head coach at West Point, because they had never hired a non-graduate. And frankly, I had the head coaching job at LSU, and after we won, I had lots of opportunities to go to different schools. And I mean, I was offered jobs at a lot of places, including one of the Denver Broncos pro team. But I didn't think I could find a better job than LSU, and we were very happy here. And I had finally gotten used to the Louisiana coffee, and I loved the cooking, and so I had no reason to even think about going anywhere else. But out of a clear blue sky, the superintendent at West Point, General Westmoreland, the same William Westmoreland, called me and asked me if I would be interested in being the head coach at LSU at Army. And I said, well, I'm not a graduate. He said, I know, but we're going to go a different direction. We've tried that long enough now. I said, well, I don't know. I'd have to talk with my athletic director here before I could even talk to you. And I said, do you have a short list of the people you're thinking about? He said, yes, we got a short list of 3 people. One of them is Murray Warmoth, the head coach at Minnesota. The other is Vince Lombardi, who is an assistant coach with the New York Giants, and you. I said, well, boy, I'm really flattered. That's a real high-powered group of 2 that you put my name in with. And I'm really very flattered. I'm honored, but if I am a candidate, you're going to have to take my name out of the list, because these people down here bleed purple and gold. And if they find out that I'm hunting for another job, they'll probably fire me. And so I just can't be a candidate. And they said, well, we'll get back to you. So they called back the next day and said, if the job is yours if you want it. Now I really had a decision to make. And it wasn't that I was unhappy at LSU. And good heavens, we had a heck of a team coming back. The 1961 team, over from top to bottom, probably was the best team we had at LSU, and they proved that. And because they were all coming back for '62, the bulk of them would be back for the '62 year. So I knew we were going to have a good football team. And I had no idea what kind of a team Army had, but they were really down at the time. And so one thing led to another, and I talked with Jim Corbett, the athletic director, and I told him what the situation was. And he said, well, you know, you got a long contract here, Paul. I said, Jim, I know that. Jim and I were real close friends, by the way. Great fella. And I said, if you won't release me from my contract, then I'll just tell him I'm not interested in the job. He said, well, if you wanted to go, you'd be miserable here if we didn't release you, and we wouldn't like that. And so if you want to go, you know we'll release you from your contract because you've done a good job here. And so now we are going to the Orange Bowl to play Colorado. And I mean, this was really kind of a big game in many ways. And Colorado is a big, powerful team from out there in the Big 8. They got to the game several days before we did. And so naturally the press had a field day interviewing them. And the gist of what these players from Colorado were saying is that, you know, this LSU team, they're awful small. I mean, you know, we're used to playing against these Oklahoma, Nebraska, Texas A&M, these big, strong football teams. We're not used to playing against such a scrawny team. And they really used the word scrawny. Anyhow, the Colorado team had used the word scrawny. And now, we were not real big, but we were a very strong team, extremely fast. And they were a big, strong team. There's no doubt about that. And I thought that article was the greatest thing that they could have done for us. So I took it to a place to make copies of it. And I made big copies of it. I had it enlarged, you know. And so in our dressing room, every locker had one of those posters in their locker. Right over the urinals, we had one. In the cubicles, we had one. And the rest of them were plastered all over the walls. By the time the game came around, our team was so sick of reading that garbage, as they called it. And then the word had leaked out that I had been talking with West Point. And it's now the night before the game down in Miami, Florida. An extra comes out with one of the newspapers, and it says, Dietzel to give LSU a goodbye win. Well, that was a terrible thing to have my players read. And all the time I was coaching, the night before a game, I always took the team for a walk, someplace isolated, and then I'd have a talk with them before they go up to their room for their milk and cookies, you know. And I said, well, I might not repeat the exact words, but this is what I said. I said, you know, fellas, I know you can read, and now you've read this paper which says I'm going to give LSU a goodbye win. And that's really a bad thing to read the night before a big game about your coach, because there's a certain amount of togetherness between us. And I just wanted to remind you, you remember all the summer long when I wrote you these letters every week and told you what kind of a workout you were required to do this week? And you remember all the times that I had you run in that stadium for missing a class or something? You remember all those times that you were dying in those 2-a-day practices and it was so dead burn hot and you could not get your breath? And I just wanted to tell you, you can't afford to throw that down the drain. You're not playing this game for Paul Dietzel. You're not playing for me at all. And you're basically not even playing for yourselves. You're playing for LSU and for the state of Louisiana. Now these people, these cowboys from out there west, they think we're a scrawny football team. Well, we'll just have to see about that. But I want you to remember this. Whatever happens in this game tomorrow, you will remember this for the rest of your life. It doesn't make any difference how many more bowls you go to. You're going to remember this one for the rest of your life. And there's a lot of guys here that this will be their last game, and they definitely will remember it for the rest of their lives. So I just want to remind you, you're playing this game especially for yourself, because this is the one that you're going to live with the rest. Well, we go out there the next day, and they have an All-American playing on the head of our center. Our center was Dennis Gaubitz. And this guy, he would not charge. He'd sit over the head of the center, and then wherever the ball went, he'd run with it. And so I told Dennis, I said, Dennis, I don't want you to block. Don't try to block him. I want you to sit like you're setting up for a pass. And when the ball starts moving, you know which way it's going anyhow. When it starts moving and he starts moving, you move too. And then when he has to come forward to go up and make a tackle, you pull in and you chop him down to the line of scrimmage. And this guy had made a zillion tackles. He never got a tackle in the game. And we beat him real bad. I mean, we embarrassed him. And I loved it. Our players loved it. It was great. And but the game is over. And there was one thing that happened the night before that I will always remember. As I said, General Troy Middleton and Jerusha, two marvelous people, had been very, very nice to Ann and I, and very nice to me as a coach. And this is after I had to walk with my team. We walk into the lobby, and there is General Middleton and Jerusha. And he said, Paul, I want you to come up to my room. I thought, uh-oh. He's going to fire me the night before the game. Anyhow, we go up there, and he says, Paul, I hear you're talking with West Point. I said, yes, sir, I am. He said, well, why didn't you come to see me? I said, well, General, I always believed in the chain of commands, having been in the Army. And my chain of command is Jim Corbett, the athletic director, and I'm sure he came to see you, and I'm sure he did. But I had figured he would tell you. He said, well, he said, I've heard about it, and I want you to know, as I said before, we don't want to lose you. We think you've done a fine job. But you have to understand that the United States Military Academy is an eye of the Army. And Army has got to have a good football team. Because so many people judge the military academy by the caliber of the football team. And therefore, They need a good football team. They need a good football coach. And if they want you, you've got to go. Man, I couldn't believe it. But that was the kind of a man he was. And of course, if I had any doubts in my mind, that made up my mind. General Middleton had a close tie with the academy. Now, he didn't graduate from there. He graduated from Mississippi State. But he had been a general under George Patton in the WW2. And General Patton had said General Middleton was the only general officer I ever had that never made a mistake. He never wanted to withdraw. When others said we need to withdraw, he said, we're not moving a muscle. And he said, I have great admiration for General Troy Middleton. And so I went to West Point. And it was very, very hard because we had a lot of friends in Baton Rouge. I'm sorry to say that so many of them have passed away by now, but our group that we used to get together with all the time with Chuck and Ruth McCoy and Luther and Margie Jordan and Bill and Eleanor Cockerham, and these people were real friends, and so they had a going away party for us, and in this party they had this mule that had been made, out of big cardboard, and it had an army blanket flap on it, and on that it says, "We're going to wish you," and you flip it over, and the first panel said, "From coon ass to mule ass in one day." And I probably shouldn't say that, but that was exactly what it said. And I thought that was remarkable. And I kept that thing I think I must have kept that thing for 30 years. It finally fell apart, but I had moved it and moved it and moved it. And it just grieves me to know that Luther and Margie Jordan have passed away, and one of my all-time dearest friends, Chuck McCoy, has passed away. But some wonderful memories of LSU in those days. Well, when I left here, people didn't know all the things that had taken place. They didn't know how I was drawn back there and what the circumstances were. And so there were a lot of people real angry at me and you see, as I said earlier, I had no intention of ever leaving LSU. I didn't. West Point was not a possibility, and I thought LSU was the best job that I could ever get. And I even turned down the pros because I liked coaching in college. And so it never occurred to me that I would ever go. And so I think I had said maybe one or two times, I don't think I'll ever leave LSU. Now, if they'd have fired me, I'd have left LSU, you understand, but I didn't plan to leave on my own. And of course, a lot of people picked this phrase up, and they got very upset at me, saying, he said he was never going to leave LSU, and he left. But in any event, that's even Russell Long, our esteemed senator, got on the floor of Congress, and he railed the military academy for stealing their football coach. And I thought in the New York press, one of Red Smith, who was a great writer in New York, he had a column one day, and in this column he said, there's one thing about when a football coach is doing well, and he says, I'm not necessarily talking only about LSU, but they say what a wonderful fellow this guy is, and he is a man of character, and so forth and so on. And of course, he's winning, and we just think the world of him. We'd give him anything for him, and they even put a swimming pool in my backyard while I was here. But in any event, and someone said, you got to run for governor. Not on your life. Anyhow, and he said, when they promise all these things for these great coaches, and they don't, and they just idolize them. But if that no good SOB ever tries to leave here, we'll show him what's what. And I thought, what an absolute article, a wonderful article, which pinned it down pretty well. But Russell really chewed the Army operation on the floor of the United States Senate. And someone sent me all the things he said about West Point. stealing players from, stealing coaches from colleges and so forth. Anyhow, well, when because of that, let me give you a little gist of how some of these things had happened. When I went to Army, and then I went to South Carolina. When I was talking with Jim Corbett back in the early 60s, and he said, Paul, we need an opening game in 1966. I said, Jim, good gravy. I'll be dead by then. Oh, no, you won't. We've got to. And he says, there's about 8 teams that'll be glad to play us because, you know, we have quite a good guarantee. We have big crowds. And I've got about 8 of them here. Which one? And I would suggest you try to get someone that is that you can beat, because you got a tough schedule. You don't need another tough game. And so I looked down the list and I thought, well, I think South Carolina would be a good one. So he scheduled South Carolina. I leave here and go to West Point, and I'm there for 4 years. And then I go to South Carolina. Guess who the opening game is? South Carolina. The game I had scheduled as a breather for LSU. 2 of our coaches had planned a vacation in the summertime in New Orleans. And you've all heard of Pat O'Brien's with the famous hurricane drinks. And they had a piano player in there called Mercedes. And Mercedes was a great big woman. And she'd play that piano, you know, I mean, never look at the keys and everything. And she'd yell out, where are you from? They say, Ohio. Down by the Ohio. And then she'd say, where are you from? And they'd say, New York. East side, west side. Our 2 coaches sitting back there in the audience. And one of them shouted out, South Carolina, without missing a beat. She said, go to hell, Paul Dietzel, go to hell. Again, I apologize for the language, but that's exactly what she said. And it kind of gives you a clue. And we're down here and getting ready for the game, and Charlie McClendon is the coach of the other side. And I'm coaching these people with a red jersey and white pants. And I look over that LSU team, and it seemed weird to me that that wasn't my team, because I'm so used to that purple and gold. And anyhow, I knew Mac. He had been my assistant for 7 years. And so we're in our dressing room, and I told the manager, you go out there and you stand there and let me know when LSU is in the chute. You know, that's where they gather. Because I'm not going out until they're out there. Because the things that LSU always did is you get your team ready, and when the other team comes out, let them get out there, and then you send the team out, and that ovation will cause a little consternation on the other team. In addition to that, they park Mike the Tiger right outside the visiting team dressing room. And when the visiting team comes out, they take a rake and run it across the bars, and that Tiger, get him to roar. So I told our team, now listen, the Tiger is in a cage. He can't get out of there. Don't pay any attention to him. He's just having a little roar, and he had nothing to do with it. And so we wait, and they wait, and we wait, and they wait. Finally, the official came over and says, Coach, you've got to be on the field, or we're going to penalize you. I said, LSU's not on the field. You're going to penalize us both? And he says, I said, besides that, until LSU gets on that field, I don't care if we play the game at midnight, we're not going out there. So finally, Max gives in. He puts his team out in the chute, and as soon as they start out, our team starts out. Didn't pay attention to Tiger. And now there's a tremendous roar, and our team, I mean, as far as our team concerned, the roar is for them. I mean, they don't know the difference. And we go out, and I mean, the fans were a little raucous, but nothing bad, you know. And we took the opening kickoff, and we marched the length of the field and scored. It got awfully quiet in Tiger Stadium. And so it didn't make any difference, though, because they were so much better than we were. And LSU was a real good coach team. Mac and his staff did a great job. And this is our first year at South Carolina. We were just an extremely mediocre team. And they beat us, I think they scored 3 touchdowns to our 1. And they wouldn't have gotten one of those because I did something I would never do, and that is I went for it on 4th down, which gave them another touchdown. But I figured, what the heck? If you're going to get beat, you might as well get beat and forget it. But anyhow, that was my experience coming back to LSU. And then you ask about coming back to LSU again. And this time, I get out of the coaching business, and I'm doing an athletic director job. And I went from South Carolina to Indiana. And on the way, I was a commissioner of the Ohio Valley Conference for a year. But then I come back to LSU, and I'm here for 4 years as athletic director. And then I left and retired up to the mountain in North Carolina, where, I've always been a ski nut. And we had a lovely home up there that we had for years and years. And so I was only 5 minutes from the ski slope, so I liked that. And I was a real estate broker, and for 2 years I was a full-time ski instructor, which I thought was great, except I found out that it's not nearly as much fun as it would be if you were young. And of course, and then that's where I began my career as a fudge maker. And so, I sold fudge up at the top of that mountain, right on the top of the mountain, 5,600 feet. And I didn't have any idea it'd be such a good thing, because I was making 250 pounds of fudge a week. But that was before people were worried about their cholesterol, because this fudge had heavy cholesterol, I'm afraid. But in any event, finally I went to Samford as a vice president in charge of athletics. But so I retired again back to the top of Beech Mountain, and I had a little heart problem one year, and I'd had a bypass years before, and so I was having this trouble in the middle of a blizzard on the top of that mountain, a white-out blizzard. And we had our trusty car, but Ann backed it out, and they plowed us in, and we couldn't see the ditch, and we backed right into the ditch. Make a long story short, they took me to the hospital in an ambulance over in Johnson City. The bumpiest ride I ever had in my life, like driving in a tank. But we came back, and Ann had a terrible time trying to follow me, because she got stuck in the snow and had to have a policeman come and haul her out. And afterwards, she was so warped out of shape, she said, "I'm not spending another year on this mountain in the wintertime." I said, "Well, if you're not, I'm not either." So naturally, how mothers are with sons. Our son lived here in Baton Rouge, along with his sweet wife, Judy. His name is Steve, and also our grandson, Paul Dietzel II. So we came back in 2003 to Baton Rouge. And guess what? That's the year Nick Saban won the national championship. And so, naturally, everyone wants Nick Saban to sign their football, or their headgear, or a poster, or some kind of a picture. And for some reason, they thought it would be nice if they could have the two national championship coaches both sign it. So in a period of about 6 weeks after that season, I signed my name more times than I had signed it for the previous 40 years. Seriously. And so finally, Nick Saban's secretary called and said, "Now, Coach, Coach Saban asked me to call you and tell you that he noticed that you had signed the football, and he signed it. And before he got home, it was on eBay for sale. And he said he's not signing any more footballs." And so from that time on, I've continued to sign when people ask me to, but I always say, "Now, who is this to?" And if it's for Tita, I say, especially for you, so that you can't sell it, or you can't it'd be kind of hard for you to sell it or pass it on to someone else. But in any event, that was a electric year for LSU. And then Saban left. People asked me, "What do you think about Saban leaving?" And I said, "Well, in the first place, it's none of my business. Second place, I always figured it this way. did he leave the place in better shape than he found it? Well, there's a pretty simple answer to that question, because they had not been the national championship the year before. And so I said, you know, I presume he always wanted to be a pro coach, and I think he found out in a couple of years he didn't want to be a pro coach. And so I think people kind of glossed over, and that's fine, but for goodness sakes, don't go to one of your biggest rivals. When he went to Alabama, that is where the shoe dropped. And now we have somebody in the same conference, and we have to play. And I think it stirred up a lot of controversy about Nick Saban, and which is, you know, that's kind of his own making. So I'm sure he'll do well with it. But it's none of my business anyhow. Should be. And then we get this coach that no one has heard of, particularly this guy called Les Miles. And the question around is, who is Les Miles? And so he came in very quietly, and I looked at his background. He's from Elyria, Ohio, and that's about 60 miles from Mansfield, Ohio, where I grew up, and where, when I was in high school, we won the state championship because we had some great athletes, and I got to play on the same team. But we knew all about Elyria, and Elyria, Massillon, Canton, McKinley, Mansfield, that is a hotbed for football in Ohio. Ohio has so many football teams. I think Texas is the only state in the union that has more teams than Ohio does. And I mean, by mistake, there's going to be so many athletes up there. And there's so many colleges up there. I mean, there are lots and lots of colleges that all play football. But in any event, he then moved from, he went to Michigan, and he ended up coaching at Michigan. And I looked at his resume, and I could tell that he has paid his dues. So without even knowing anything about him, without ever having met him, I know if he had coached in all those places, he had done his dues. And so before he even got here, I thought, well, I think they've hired a good person. And so he comes in here, and lo and behold, what happens? Katrina. I mean, what worse could happen? Now all these players have people living in their apartments with them. Friends come from New Orleans and have 6 or 8 people in the apartment. And it's really a almost impossible situation. And I think at that time Les showed his true colors, because you could tell the way he was handling the players that he knew what he was doing. I doubt seriously that there's any coach in the United States who could have done as good a job with a situation that he had here at LSU than he did. And that wasn't bad enough. To add insult to injury, guess what? They take his opening game in the very wonderful warm confines, wild confines of the LSU stadium, and move it to Arizona. Now that was a real downer, but it didn't bother Les, and they went out and played. And I know people said, well, they just barely. Well, I don't care if it barely, or if you barely lose or you barely win. Which side is it on, W or a loss? And so I thought that was a remarkable job that he did. And since that time, he has gradually proved to everyone around, I think, that he is really a fine football coach. And I think he's a fine guy. I like him very much. And he's got a fine family. He's got 4 children, my goodness. And he's a good dad. I saw he and a couple of his boys out there at the national championship for the baseball team. And, you know, he does all the right things. And frankly, I think he's low-key, but he's very knowledgeable about the game of football. And he's certainly not afraid to take chances. I mean, when you go line up to do an extra point and flip the ball out here, and the guy, luckily he's in the right spot and he catches it and you score. I mean that's really laying it on the line. But he doesn't do it foolishly. He does it when it really means something. And I just like Les. I think he's a fine football coach, and he's a fine man. Well, I told you how I feel about Les, and I sincerely do. But that's not to say that Nick Saban is not a good coach, because he surely is. The only thing about Nick is he's not warm and fuzzy. And he's very abrupt. He can be downright unfriendly. And he has a knack of somehow figuring out how he can make the press mad at him. But doesn't have anything to do with his coaching ability, because he's a darn good coach. And obviously he's a good recruiter, because he didn't take long to get Alabama back on the winning streak. But he's a good coach. He just comes from an entirely different angle. Of course, he's from West Virginia. He's not from Ohio. Well, when I first came here, as one of our players said, and they interviewed him, he said, well, you know, when we were playing here, we were lucky to have 20,000 people in the stands. That was it. And as someone else said, well, LSU, they're with you all the way, win or tie. But LSU fans are extremely vocal. And, you know, night games, and they start their tailgating parties in the afternoon. And I would never imply that they have anything alcoholic beforehand, but generally by the time they get to the game, an awful lot of them they're in high spirits. And of course, they'll let you know when they don't like something as much as when they do like something, you know. But they like to win, and like any place else, if you don't win, it's not going to be near as much fun around there. I can give you a perfect for instance of that. We are ranked #1 in the nation, and we're playing, who we're playing doesn't matter, but I think we're playing Tulane, down in the old Tulane Stadium. And we are probably about midfield. And the thing comes up, it's 4th down and 1. And so we always kick from T-punt, which means that the quarterback is up under the center. And the two halfbacks are here, and the punter is way back here 9 yards deep. And we center the ball between his legs, and the punter kicks it. Now we've got the blockers on both sides. But we have running plays from this formation too. And it's 4th down and 1. And Rab, who's the quarterback, looks over to me, and I said, kick the ball. And he says, what? And I said, timeout. So Rab comes over and says, Coach, we can make that, for goodness sakes. I said, just line up and we'll run fake T-punt, quarterback wedge right. Now I said, Warren, when you go out there, tell the players to ham it up. And I want you especially to ham it up. Halfway out there, stop and turn around and say, let's go for it, Coach, and I'm going to turn my back on you and so forth. And I want all the players out there to say, Coach, let's go for it, you know. And so by now, the fans have picked this thing up. And Rab is about halfway around. He turns around, Coach. And I say, no. And I turn around and like I turn my back on him. And the players they're all saying, you know, they want to go for it. And the fans are boo, 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 boo. I mean, the place is inundated with boos. And just about then, Rab comes up, snaps the ball, and he runs for 9 yards, right up the middle. And right in the middle of the run, when the ball is snapped, and they saw it wasn't a punt, they were yelling, boo, 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 and it changes to, Ray, Ray, Ray. I said, that's the only time I've ever had a football game where they were yelling for a card game in the middle of the game. Boo Ray. You've heard of Boo Ray. Anyhow, I thought that showed you the nomenclature of it, of the fan. And the fans, I think as a coach, I have two, and the reason I say this is because I was lucky to have a great high school coach who really did his best to help me get a college education. Then I had a great college coach, Sid Gilman, who's the smartest coach I ever knew by far, who treated me like his son. I played for him and then I coached for him. And so I got some early thoughts about how you treat a player. And I always felt when I was coaching it, it's just like a railroad. And on a railroad, you know that that train cannot run on one rail. Now they have a monorail, but I'm talking about the old steam engine. It has to have two rails. One rail is, you better make up your mind and figure out that if you don't win, you're going to get fired. In order to continue coaching, you've got to win. Now the other rail is that you have to balance is that you're going to be coaching the most precious thing a mother and father will ever have, their son. And you have to treat those players like you would like to have your son treated. And that's what I've always tried to do. Maybe I didn't always do it. And they thought at times that I really was a little tough on them and so forth, and I was. But the funny thing is, they come back to me now and say, you know what, Coach, I didn't like that when you were making us do that, but I made my son do the same thing, and I appreciate it. So basically, it's a balancing act between you have to win, and you're coaching the most priceless possession that a mother and father will ever have.